Welcome, dear listeners. Tonight, let your thoughts drift gently as we take you on a peaceful journey. This is a space for calm, for quiet moments, and for the kind of stories that settle your heart and slow your breath. Make yourself comfortable, close your eyes if you wish, and allow the world to soften around you. Now, let's begin with tonight's story. Today's story is titled Winds of Eternity. Act 1, When Night Fell Upon the World. The last hues of dusk melted behind the hills as a veil of quiet fell over the countryside. In a modest cottage tucked among tall whispering pines, a boy named Oren Thistlewind sat by the window, his gaze lost in the rising moonlight. The silver orb climbed steadily above the treetops, illuminating the glade outside with a soft, silken glow. Crickets sang in slow cadence. The air shimmered with a stillness only found on the brink of dreams. Oren was no ordinary boy, not entirely. Though only 16, he carried with him a gift, or a curse, depending on whom you asked. Since he was a child, he'd been visited by vivid dreams so real they lingered in his thoughts like perfume on fabric. He never told anyone. Not his parents, not his older sister, not even his grandfather who once claimed to speak with owls. These dreams weren't simple stories, they were places. Worlds that whispered to him, called to him. Tonight, something in the air felt different. Heavy. Electric. He knew instinctively that tonight wouldn't be just another wander through sleep. He closed his notebook, where half-scribbled poetry lay unfinished, and let his fingers rest on the cool wooden windowsill. Beyond the glass, the moon's reflection shimmered across the surface of the pond, flickering like a silver coin tossed into a well. For a moment, everything was still. Then the wind changed. It wasn't just a breeze. It carried a tone, a note so subtle most would have missed it. But Oren felt it deep in his bones. Like a bell had rung inside him. Slowly, he opened the window wider, letting the cool breath of the night wash over his face. And there it was. A glow. From the edge of the forest, a warm luminescence began to rise, soft and pulsing like the heart of a lantern. It weaved through the trees and made no sound. Oren leaned forward. The glow seemed to move with purpose, as if it were alive. No, as if it were looking for something. For him. His heart thudded softly in his chest, not in fear but in knowing. It wasn't the first time something unusual had come calling. But this was new. This wasn't a dream, it was happening now, and he was awake. Oren stood and walked slowly to his door, slipping on a light cloak and leather boots. He paused at the threshold, glancing one last time at the sleeping house. The fire in the hearth had died down to embers. His family was likely deep in slumber. Just a few minutes, he whispered, a silent pact with himself. Just to see what it is. Outside, the forest was alive with shadows. But the light, he could see it clearly now, floated just above the ground, dancing like a will-o'-the-wisp. Oren followed, drawn by curiosity and something else, something ancient. With every step, the air thickened with a soft hum. Not a sound, exactly, but more like a presence. A rhythm in the world that had always been there, waiting to be noticed. As he passed under the arching limbs of the old elm grove, the trees seemed to lean closer, their leaves rustling secrets to one another. The light beckoned. And then it paused. Oren stood still, not daring to breathe too loud. The glow circled once, then rose higher into the air, revealing itself not as a lantern or a spirit, but as a cloud. A small, luminescent puff of cloud, like a piece of the sky had broken off and decided to wander the earth. It shimmered with soft hues, blues, pinks, silver like moonlight refracted through water. It drifted closer, brushing against Oren's cheek. It was warm, gentle, and, somehow familiar. As if he had known this cloud once before, in another lifetime. Then, to his astonishment, it began to speak. Not in words, but in images and feelings that filled his mind, a city in the sky, towers made of vapor, laughter echoing from balconies of mist. It was calling him. The cloud hovered just in front of him, pulsing slowly, then began to ascend. Higher, higher just beyond his reach. Oren didn't hesitate. He leapt softly, instinctively, and to his surprise, the cloud caught him. Not like a hard surface, but like a current of air that lifted him gently off the forest floor. He was floating. Below, the world shrank, trees became patches of moss, the pond a sliver of light. Above him stretched the endless night sky, dusted with stars so brilliant they made his eyes water. The cloud carried him upward, higher than he'd ever imagined, past the tops of mountains, beyond the call of birds, until all he could hear was the pulse of the wind and his own breath. And then it stopped. They hovered in place. Before them, hanging in the night sky as if stitched there by the cosmos itself, was a doorway arched and radiant, rimmed with crescent moons and stars that shimmered in perpetual motion. It didn't rest on anything. It simply existed, waiting. The cloud lowered him gently onto a platform of woven starlight. Oren stepped forward. The door opened on its own. What lay beyond was not darkness but the beginning of a realm long forgotten by the waking world. A realm that had waited, perhaps forever, for a dreamer brave enough to return. Oren inhaled deeply, smiled, and crossed the threshold. Act 2, The Whispering Path Between Stars. As Oren stepped through the glowing archway, a breathless hush enveloped him. He was neither falling nor flying, but floating forward along a silvery corridor that pulsed with slow-moving constellations. Stars shimmered gently on either side, scattered like jewels across invisible walls. It felt as though he were drifting along a river of starlight, one that flowed between worlds. There was no ground beneath his feet, only a path formed by soft ripples of light. It responded to his steps, each one sending gentle waves of color rippling outward. Every few moments, fragments of distant music tickled his ears, tiny, airy notes like flutes played by wind. Then came voices. Not sharp or alarming, but layered, and melodic, like ancient lullabies sung in forgotten tongues. The air here tasted different. Clean, crisp, yet filled with memory, like walking through a childhood dream. Oren pressed a hand to his chest. His heartbeat was steady, but his mind brimmed with questions. Where was this place? Was he still dreaming? Was he awake in a dream? Or had the veil between the two simply melted? Ahead, the corridor began to widen, fanning out into a grand open space, a celestial atrium, its ceiling a dome of dancing auroras, its floor a surface of shifting clouds. Here, dozens of floating lights hovered quietly, each like a tiny sun encased in mist. Some bobbed gently as if greeting him, others drifted past like thoughts not yet formed. And then he saw her. From the far end of the atrium, a girl emerged, about his age, her hair an unusual blend of twilight blue and ash white, cascading down her back like a waterfall of mist. Her cloak shimmered like a raven's wing, sometimes black, sometimes navy, sometimes vanishing into the surrounding haze. She didn't walk so much as glide. "Welcome, Oren Thistlewind," she said, her voice soft yet resonant. "The winds told us you'd come." He blinked. "You know my name." "We've always known. The sky remembers those who listen." She extended a hand. "I'm Lyra, keeper of the threshold. My task is to guide travelers between the realms, those rare few who awaken before they dream." Oren hesitated, then accepted her hand. It was warm, grounding. "Where am I?" he asked. "Between," she said. "Neither sky nor earth. Neither memory nor future. You are on the whispering path, the stream that flows from your world to the next. Few find it. Fewer still are chosen. And where does it lead?" Lyra smiled. "To a city among the clouds. A realm called Numinous. It is a place that once echoed in your dreams, though you may not remember. You were born with a sliver of sky in your heart, Oren. That's why the mist rail found you." He remembered the glowing cloud, the one that had lifted him. "Is that what it's called?" "The mist rail." She nodded. "It is ancient. Sentient. One of the last remaining bridges between your world and ours." She turned, and the corridor around them dimmed. "But before you can reach Numinous, you must pass the first drift." Oren's brow furrowed. "What is that?" "An echo of yourself," Lyra replied, cryptically. "It shows you what you carry, the things that weigh you down and lift you up. Joy. Fear. Regret. Wonder. To cross safely, you must face what hides in the stillness of your own sky." With a wave of her hand, a doorway appeared, oval-shaped, spinning with silver threads. A breeze curled around them, playful and curious. Lyra stepped back. "I cannot follow you through this one," she said. "Only those born under the starlit veil may pass alone." Oren felt a flicker of anxiety rise in his chest, but he took a breath, steadied himself, and stepped forward. The instant he crossed the threshold, he found himself in his bedroom. Everything looked the same. The chair, the scattered books, the moonlight slanting across his wooden desk. Had it all been a dream after all? Then the reflection moved. He looked at the window, where his reflection should have been, and saw another version of himself. Not sinister. Not angry. Just different. This version wore a worn traveler's cloak. His eyes looked older, as though they had seen distant mountains and deeper sorrows. But they were still his eyes. "You've been waiting for this," the other Oren said. "Haven't you?" "I don't understand." "You do. You've always wanted to leave. To find out what's beyond. But something kept you there. Guilt, maybe. Or fear." Oren's throat tightened. "I didn't want to abandon anyone. And yet you've never truly stayed," the mirror self whispered. "Not in your heart. You lived in dreams because the waking world never felt real to you." The silence that followed was heavy but not cruel. "Will you let yourself go?" the figure asked. "Will you let the wind carry you forward without chaining yourself to what might have been?" Oren didn't answer with words. He stepped toward the reflection, merging with it. A soft wind blew again. The bedroom faded. The stars returned. He was back on the path. Lyra stood waiting, the silver mist gently circling her. "You've crossed the first drift," she said. "Few do." He felt lighter. Not in body but in being. "Numinous awaits," she said with a mysterious smile. "But the skies still have many secrets to unfold." Act 3, The City in the Clouds. Oren had always imagined what a city in the sky might look like. He had dreamed of towers woven from clouds, of bridges made from moonlight, of rooftops where starlings roosted alongside wind spirits. But none of those dreams compared to what lay before him now. Numinous. The name echoed in his chest like a secret remembered. Suspended in the firmament, the city floated gently across the upper skies, tethered to nothing but itself. Great domes of crystal mist shimmered like dew caught in sunlight. Spiral towers twisted upward, catching starlight in their spires. Pathways of light stretched between buildings, held aloft by nothing visible. Around it all, a halo of glowing rings rotated silently, an astral rhythm known only to the skies. The mist rail cloud carried Oren and Lyra through a shimmering archway that marked the city's outer boundary. As they passed through, a tingling sensation crawled across his skin. It felt like crossing into sacred ground. Numinous does not merely exist in the sky, Lyra whispered beside him. It is sky, shaped by those who dwell here. Their cloud touched down in a central plaza. The moment Oren's boots met the soft, pulsing surface of the city, he gasped. The ground beneath him was firm, yet buoyant like walking on compressed starlight. Light shifted beneath every step, creating a rippling mosaic of soft blues and silvers. All around, the city buzzed with gentle life. Winged beings fluttered past, some humanoid, others more ethereal, like wisps of cloud given shape and thought. Floating carriages carried passengers above the streets, drawn by glowing creatures resembling jellyfish with long, trailing tendrils. Market stalls bloomed with goods Oren couldn't begin to name, vials of bottled thunder, pastries made from rain essence, scrolls that whispered when touched. This place, Oren murmured. It's alive. Lyra nodded. Numinous is a dream given form. But not just yours. It is the meeting place of many dreamers, many worlds. Some pass through. Others stay forever. Oren turned, catching sight of a figure watching him from across the square. An old man in robes of woven mist, with eyes like storm clouds. He bowed slightly, then faded into nothingness. Who was that? Oren asked. Lyra's gaze followed where he pointed, but she didn't seem surprised. The city watches its guests. Not all guardians wear form. They continued walking, past a fountain that flowed upward instead of down. Drops of glowing water hovered mid-air, each emitting a soft chime. Children made of vapor ran through the droplets, giggling as they changed color. Lyra led him toward a grand avenue lined with floating lanterns. As they walked, she explained. There are 3 main districts in Numinous. The Drift Walk, where we are now, where newcomers arrive and markets thrive. The Skywell, home to the elders and the keepers like me. And finally, the Veilspire, a place few ever enter. It houses the Codex of Winds, and the memories of those who've passed between realms. Oren's eyes sparkled. And, we'll visit all of them. If the wind permits, she said with a sly smile. They turned a corner and arrived at a large courtyard where a massive tree stood. Its branches weren't made of wood, but of light, bending in slow arcs like tendrils of the aurora. Beneath it sat a woman, her hair braided with stars, her hands cradling a harp that glowed with inner fire. She looked up. So this is the boy the mist rail chose. Her voice was wind and thunder rolled into song. This is Lyra, the dream harper, Lyra said quietly. She weaves the harmonies that protect Numinous from breaking apart. Oren bowed, unsure of how one greets someone who plays music for the sky itself. Lyra gestured for him to sit. You've walked a long path, child. And it has just begun. The skies are not kind to all who soar. Oren nodded slowly. I didn't expect kindness. I just Felt like I had to come. The dream harper smiled. A good answer. The mist rail doesn't choose those who seek safety. It chooses those who seek meaning. She plucked a single note from her harp. The air rippled. Oren's vision blurred, and for a heartbeat, he saw flashes of other realms. A desert with stars embedded in its sand. A library suspended over an endless sea. A mountain that whispered its own name. Then it was gone. You are connected to more than you know, Elira said softly. And soon, your memories will begin to echo with places you've never seen. He swallowed. Will I remember why I came here? You already do, she said. She stood and placed a glowing pendant in his palm. It looked like a tiny compass, but the needle spun not in circles, but in gentle spirals. When the wind no longer answers your call, she said, this will guide you. Before he could ask more, she vanished, folding into a gust of shimmering mist. Lyra touched his shoulder. Come. There's someone else you must meet. They walked in silence, Oren cradling the pendant in his hand, feeling its subtle warmth. He didn't know where he was headed, or who he would become in this place. But something within him had already changed. He was no longer just a visitor in a dream. He was becoming part of the sky. Act 4, The Cloudborn Folk. The path to the next district shimmered like glass soaked in moonlight. As Lyra and Oren left the grand plaza behind, the energy of Numinous changed. The sounds grew softer, more intimate. The air was laced with distant music, the kind that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere, echoes of joy, fragments of lullabies, whispers that may have been wind or memory. They crossed a bridge that arched over nothing but air. Beneath them, clouds stirred in slow spirals. Oren looked down and saw shapes moving within the mist, creatures gliding just out of view, with tails like comets and eyes like polished amber. They're called sky swimmers, Lyra said, noticing his gaze. They ferry dreams from one world to another. If you see one closely, offer it a secret, it might carry it somewhere you'll never expect. Oren chuckled nervously. I'm not sure which of my secrets would be good enough. They all are, Lyra replied. Secrets are the breath of the sky. The bridge led them to a crescent-shaped district nestled within a circular basin of clouds. This was Cloudhearth, home to the Cloudborn folk, the native dwellers of Numinous. Not travelers, not dreamers from other realms, but those born in this skyborn city, woven of its very essence. As they descended into the basin, Oren's senses reeled. Houses here floated like bubbles tethered to invisible roots. Some shimmered with soft pastels, others blinked with lights that changed color based on mood. Walkways weren't fixed, they moved gently as if responding to the desires of those who walked them. There were no hard angles, no stone or steel, everything was fluid, alive. And the people. They came in forms that danced between solid and vapor, their outlines shifting like slow smoke. Some looked mostly human, with luminous eyes and hair that flowed like wind-blown silk. Others were less defined shapes of shimmering fog that pulsed with color as they moved. They did not speak with words. Instead, their presence emanated emotion, comfort, curiosity, welcome. As Oren passed, he felt waves of warmth, like being wrapped in the embrace of a long-lost friend. A child of mist floated past, holding a lantern shaped like a shell. She giggled as the lantern released glowing motes into the air. "She likes you," Lyra said with a smile. "How do you know?" "I can feel it." Cloud-born emotions are pure and shared freely. You don't hear their voices, you feel their intent. Oren nodded slowly, overwhelmed by the sheer serenity of it all. In the center of Cloud Hearth stood a spiraling pavilion made of braided vapor and moon thread. Its roof was a dome of ever-turning clouds, and inside, figures sat in quiet communion. Lyra led him inside. The moment he entered, the temperature shifted cooler, but not cold. A hush fell over the space, though no one had spoken. Around him were seated elders, larger, more defined cloud folk, each one humming with the gravity of age. One stood. He was tall, draped in robes made of stormlight and dawn. His face was both young and ancient. When he stepped forward, the air shimmered. "I am Thalan, eldest of Cloud Hearth. You, Oren Thistlewind, carry the mark of the Wind Strider." "The what?" Oren asked. "You were not only chosen by the Mist Rail," Thalan said. "You answered it? That is rare. Most dreamers float." "You reached. You chose." Oren didn't know what to say. Lyra bowed her head respectfully. "You are welcome here," Thalan continued. "But understand, this city responds to will, to presence. It will test you not with swords or riddles, but with reflection. Numinous is not only a place. It is a mirror of self." He gestured for Oren to sit in a swirling seat of cloud stuff. "What do you seek?" Thalan asked. The question echoed inside Oren. He thought of home. Of never quite fitting. Of wandering the edges of his own life, waiting for something to call him. He looked up, meeting the elder's gaze. "I seek, to feel real. To find a place where the sky doesn't forget me." The pavilion grew still. And then, without a word, the elders began to hum. Low at first, then rising. The air thickened with light. Oren's seat lifted gently, and he felt warmth pour into his chest, a memory he didn't recognize, a laugh he hadn't yet lived, the sense of belonging that slipped past words. "You have passed the welcome rite," Thalan said as the hum faded. "You are now a guest of the skies. And with that, a responsibility." Oren stood, dazed. "What kind of responsibility?" Lyra stepped forward. Tomorrow, you will begin the Skyweaver's Walk. The Len nodded. A journey across the oldest currents of numinous. A test not of strength, but of alignment. If you pass, the skies will speak your true name. Oren swallowed. And if I fail? The Len's eyes gleamed. Then you will still learn. All storms leave something behind. That evening, Lyra brought him to a floating guest chamber, a bubble of cloud anchored by drifting vines of starlight. Inside, a soft bed waited, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. As he lay down, the entire chamber gently rotated, offering a full view of the vast celestial dome above. Oren stared at the stars. They looked closer now, as if he could reach out and touch them. He thought of the cloud-born child's laughter, of the Len's hum, of the sky waiting to whisper his name. Somewhere deep within the silence, he heard it again, that subtle tone, that wind bell chime that had awakened everything. This time, it didn't feel like it was calling him. It felt like it was listening. Act 5, The Skyweaver's Walk begins. Dawn in Numinous did not arrive with sunlight, but with song. Oren awoke to a chorus of wind chimes rippling across the city, each tuned to a different layer of the sky. High above his floating chamber, flocks of shimmering skybirds glided past, their wings trailing trails of prismatic vapor. A gentle breeze blew through the open archway, laced with the scent of cloudberry and aurora dust. Lyra waited just outside, her cloak fluttering like a living shadow in the wind. Today it begins, she said, offering Oren a curved glass vessel filled with glowing liquid. Drink. It will open your senses to the higher winds. Oren hesitated for only a moment before sipping. The liquid was cool and slightly sweet, and as it passed down his throat, the world shifted. Colors deepened. Sounds became layered, as though he were hearing multiple melodies at once. He could feel the vibration of his own heartbeat against the sky. Come, Lyra said. The Skyweaver's Walk is waiting. They departed Cloud Hearth on a narrow causeway made of braided silver mist. The path twisted and turned, anchored by nothing visible, suspended over a churning sea of storm clouds miles below. The horizon glowed faintly as if the sky itself were still dreaming. At the entrance to the walk stood a tall figure clad in robes made from rain and sunlight. Their face was hidden behind a veil of gently falling mist, and they carried a staff topped with a crystal that spun on its own axis. I am Calren of the boundless air, warden of the weave, the figure intoned. Do you, Oren Thistlewind, seek to walk the threads of sky? Oren nodded. I do. Then you must understand. The Skyweaver's Walk is not a path you travel, it is a mirror that travels through you. It will show you the winds within, the storms you carry, and the breezes you have forgotten. Calren struck the ground with the staff. The sky opened. A massive spiral of clouds unfurled before them, forming a twisting corridor that stretched into infinity. Within the spiral, fragments of light blinked memories, possibilities, echoes of unseen realms. It was a staircase of vapor, a bridge of thought, a challenge woven from the stuff of soul. Lyra placed a hand on Oren's shoulder. "You walk this alone. I will be waiting at the far end." Oren nodded, heart pounding. He stepped forward. Immediately, the wind rose. Not violently, but insistently, like hands pressing against him from every side. The path beneath his feet shifted constantly, forcing him to move with balance and instinct. It wasn't just a walkway, it was alive, a stream of motion that refused to stay still. The first challenge came without warning. The sky around him darkened, and he found himself standing in the middle of a field, a memory he recognized instantly. His old schoolyard. But it wasn't quite right. The edges were blurred, like an unfinished dream. Children played in slow motion. He stood by a tree, watching a younger version of himself sitting alone, knees drawn to chest. He remembered this day. It was the day his best friend moved away. The day he'd first felt truly alone. The memory. Oren looked up at him, eyes filled with unspoken questions. "What did you do?" the child whispered. Oren knelt beside him. "I waited. I hoped. And then, I dreamed." The memory blurred, twisted, and then became wind, spiraling upward into the path. The next step appeared. He walked again. Each step brought more fragments. A moment when he had lied to protect someone. A missed opportunity. A time he had been brave. Another when he had chosen silence over truth. Each one rose like a wave, threatened to sweep him away, and then faded into wind. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time had lost its grip. Then, the path widened. He stood before a massive gate woven from cloudvine and sunglass shimmering threads that changed color as he approached. Above it, 3 glyphs hovered in the air, glowing faintly. "Remember. Accept. Choose." The gate began to unravel. Oren stepped through. On the other side was not Lyra, nor the city. It was sky. Pure, endless sky. No ground. No orientation. No up or down. Just being. And before him floated a figure made of wind and light. It wore no face, but he recognized it nonetheless. It was himself, not from the past, but from a possible future. A version of him fully intertwined with the winds of Numenez, eyes like twin storms, voice like a chorus. "You have walked the threads," the figure said. "You have faced your truths. Now speak your name." Oren hesitated. Then he whispered, "Oren Thistlewind." The figure smiled and shattered into motes of light that spiraled into his chest. The sky folded. And Lyra stood before him. He was kneeling, the wind around him calm and still. His pendant glowed with a steady spiral. "You've done it," she said, voice soft. He looked at her, eyes wide. "I saw everything. My doubts. My fears. But also my hopes." She helped him stand. "That is the Skyweaver's gift. Not to change you, but to show you." They turned. The city of Numinous shimmered ahead, brighter than ever. And Oren felt different. Not because he had become someone new, but because he had seen who he had always been. And for the first time, he believed. Act 6, Into the Veil's Pier. Numinous had changed. Or perhaps it was Oren who had. The buildings now shimmered with a depth he hadn't noticed before, colors folding over themselves like waves of light, architecture bending in ways that suggested the city was listening to him, just as much as he was witnessing it. The floating bridges curved more sharply. The sky itself felt thicker, more intimate. After the Skyweaver's walk, the city no longer held him as a guest. It had begun to accept him as one of its own. He stood beside Lyra at the edge of a wide sky terrace known as the Halcyon Reach, staring toward a looming structure in the far distance, a spire so tall it disappeared into the clouds above. Unlike the rest of Numinous, which breathed with beauty and soft wonder, this tower was sharp, precise, and still. The Veil's Pier. "Are you sure I'm ready for this?" Oren asked. Lyra didn't answer right away. Her gaze lingered on the horizon, her silhouette framed by slow-moving skybeasts swimming past in the distance. "No one is ever ready," she finally said. "But sometimes, the wind doesn't wait for readiness. It waits for resonance." She turned to him. "The Codex of Winds is inside the Veil's Pier. It doesn't speak in language. It reveals." "And what does it reveal?" "Truths older than thought. Stories told by the wind before there were voices to hear them." Oren took a deep breath. "Let's go." They left the terrace aboard a vessel unlike any he had seen before, a skiff woven from starlight thread and anchored by twin spirals of magnetic cloudstone. It moved without noise, guided not by engines, but by intention. The moment Oren stepped aboard, it reacted to him, lifting smoothly into the higher layers of sky. The journey took time. As they rose, the air became thinner but more vibrant. Colors he had no names for danced across his vision. Wisps of ancient air curled around the skiff, some whispering songs, others weaving visions from distant corners of memory. Oren saw flashes, a storm cradling an entire village, a woman walking on thunder clouds, a child whispering to the stars. "What are they?" he asked Lyra. "Wind echoes," she replied. "Thoughts too old to fade, memories too strong to forget." Finally, they arrived. The Veil's Pier stood upon a flat disk of woven cloud metal, surrounded by a barrier of slow-turning glyphs. The tower itself had no visible door, no windows. It simply was a column of compressed mist and memory, humming faintly with power. As they approached, the glyphs rotated faster, recognizing something within Oren. One by one, they folded inward, dissolving into his pendant. The spire opened. Inside, the silence was immediate and absolute. Oren stepped in alone. Lyra remained outside, offering a final nod. The walls inside the Veil's Pier weren't walls at all, they were streams of frozen motion. Time itself shimmered around him. Every step he took, the space responded. He saw moments unfold in stasis, a lightning strike paused mid-flash, a teardrop suspended in air, a flock of birds mid-wing beat, unmoving but alive. He was walking through a library of time. At its heart lay the Codex of Winds. It didn't look like a book. It was a storm. Contained within a sphere of transparent force, the Codex spun a miniature cyclone of glyphs, winds, whispers, and colors so vibrant they seemed to hum. The moment Oren stepped close, it reacted. The winds reached for him. One brushed his forehead. Instantly, he was elsewhere. He stood in a memory not his own. A battlefield in the clouds. Two armies made of vapor and fire. A single figure at the center, arms outstretched, holding the storm at bay with nothing but breath. Then, another flash. A group of dreamers gathered beneath a weeping moon, planting a single seed into the sky. That seed would become numinous. Another flash. A face his own, older, scarred, standing atop the Veil's Pier with hundreds watching, the winds spiraling around him as if obeying his very will. The visions ended. He was back. The Codex pulsed. It spoke. Not in sound, but in a deep knowing that echoed through his bones. You are a wind not yet named. You are a storm still choosing its shape. But your arrival is no accident. The breach has begun. Oren staggered back. What breach? He asked aloud. The winds did not answer. But in his palm, the pendant shattered. Its pieces spiraled into his chest, absorbed into his breath, his pulse, his voice. And for the first time, Oren felt the sky respond to him. He left the Veil's Pier changed. Lyra saw it in his eyes the moment he stepped out. You heard it, she whispered. He nodded. And something is coming. Something that threatens even this place. She didn't look surprised. The skies remember everything. Even their endings. They stood in silence for a long moment. Then Lyra turned toward the city. Come. It's time to gather the Dream Guard. Oren followed her, a quiet fire burning in his chest. Numinous was no longer just a wonder. It was now a world in peril. And he had become part of its defense. Act 7, the Dream Guard assemble. The sky felt heavier now, even in the serenity of Numinous. Something had shifted within Oren the moment he had absorbed the pieces of his shattered pendant. The winds had spoken to him, but they had left more than just their words. They had left a pull, a weight. He could feel it deep within his chest, an unspoken truth that he hadn't quite grasped. Lyra led him through the winding pathways of the city, past the shimmering houses of cloudstone and fields of glowing moss, until they reached the heart of Numinous, the Skywell. This was the sacred district where the city's elders gathered, a place of ancient wisdom and deep resonance. But today, it was also a place of urgency. "The Dream Guard will meet us here," Lyra said, her voice low but steady. She paused before a great floating archway made of woven starlight, the entrance to the Skywell's council chamber. Oren stepped inside, his heart quickening. The chamber was immense, suspended in the sky like an open-air amphitheater, with seats of ethereal mist arranged in concentric circles. At the center stood a vast pool of liquid sky, swirling gently with the colors of distant nebulae. Reflections danced across the surface, showing not the sky above, but the history of Numinous itself, the rise and fall of cities, the birth of storms, the migration of the first wind-born folk. And standing around the pool were the Dream Guard. They were a collection of beings Oren had never seen before. Some were humanoid, their features made of mist and light, their eyes glowing with the knowledge of countless stars. Others were more ethereal beings of wind and cloud, their forms ever shifting, like fleeting thoughts on the horizon. Each wore robes of swirling vapor, each held in their hands symbols of power, staffs made from solidified light, or sigils carved into cloudstone. At the head of the assembly stood Calrain, the warden of the weave, who had first guided Oren through the Skyweaver's walk. But it was the others who caught his attention, the ones whose presence felt familiar, yet foreign. There was Vila, a woman whose face was hidden behind a veil of rain. Her voice, when she spoke, seemed to echo from deep within the earth, as though the sound itself had been buried for centuries. Then there was Arinder, a towering figure made of clouds and shadows, his eyes reflecting a storm that never ceased. And Lyra, a spirit who looked as though she were woven from the very winds of dawn, her laughter soft but piercing, like a breeze through a mountain pass. They turned to him as one. "You have returned," Calrain said, his voice resonating with the weight of the sky itself. "And so has the storm." Oren swallowed. "I don't understand." "What storm?" "The one that comes for all things," Vila said softly. Her eyes glowed with a deep sadness. "The breach, Oren Thistlewind. It is a rift between worlds, a crack in the fabric of time itself. It is growing. And it seeks to tear through Numinous." Arinder stepped forward, his large form moving like a wave. "The winds have sensed it. The Codex of Winds has whispered of it. But the skies do not know why it is happening. Only that it is." Oren's heart raced. "What can I do?" "You must choose," Lyra said, her voice like the soft rustle of leaves. "You have already begun the path of the Dream Guard. But this path is not one of comfort. It is a path of action." She gestured to the pool in the center of the chamber, where ripples were beginning to form, distorting the reflections. The dream guard protects Numinous, but we cannot face the breach alone. We need you to help us gather the Skikken, those who walk between worlds, those who possess the power of the winds and storms. Oren's breath caught. He had heard of the Skikken in whispers, legends passed down through the wind-born folk beings who had once traveled freely between the realms, holding power over the elements. They had vanished long ago, their memories woven into the winds themselves. But the Skikken are lost, Oren said. How can I find them? The winds will guide you, Vila said, her voice distant. But it is not just the Skikken you need. There are others, too. Those who control the storms, those who command the skies. They are scattered across the realms, waiting to be called. And you are the key that can unlock them. Oren felt a weight settle in his chest. The responsibility of the task ahead was overwhelming. He had come to Numinous seeking answers, but now he found himself standing on the edge of something far greater than he had ever imagined. The room fell silent as the dream guard turned to face the swirling sky above them. A breeze stirred the air, carrying with it the faintest scent of rain and salt. We will send you, Calran said, his voice like thunder, to the first of the lost ones. But beware, Oren Thistlewind. The breach does not just tear through worlds. It corrupts them. It twists those it touches. Oren nodded, steeling himself. He had come this far. He could not turn back now. I'm ready, he said, his voice steady, though doubt lingered in his heart. Then go, Lyra said. Go to the first, the one who calls himself Mistral. The Mistral. Oren echoed. The name sounded familiar, but he could not place it. Do not trust it completely, Vila warned. The Mistral is not what it seems. But it is tied to the storm, to the breach. And it will lead you to the others. Oren turned toward the door, his mind spinning with everything he had just learned. The weight of the sky seemed to press down on him, but now it was a weight he would bear. The dream guard watched as he stepped into the swirling winds, the storm beginning to grow louder in the distance. May the winds guide you, Lyra's voice echoed behind him, for the skies themselves will test you. And with that, Oren was gone, swallowed by the wind. Act 8, The Mistral's Call. The winds had begun to speak to Oren in ways they never had before. When he stepped out from the council chamber, a deep, resonant hum filled his chest. The air itself seemed to lean into him, like a familiar whisper he could almost understand. With every step, the city of Numinous shifted and breathed around him, as if it were alive with anticipation. Lyra walked beside him, but the weight of the task ahead made the air between them heavy. She did not speak much, letting the sounds of the city fill the silence: soft chimes, the rustling of vaporous leaves, the distant laughter of cloud-born children. But Oren felt something else too, something more pressing. It wasn't just the wind speaking. He was hearing a call, a distant beckoning that felt ancient, familiar, yet unsettling. The Mistral, he murmured to himself. Lyra glanced over at him. Yes. The Mistral is no mere wind. It is a force unto itself, older than numinous. Some say it is the breath of the sky. Others believe it is the will of the storm incarnate. So what exactly is it? She hesitated. That is what you must discover. The path to the Mistral's location was not a simple one. As they ascended to the highest platform of Numenez, the sky grew darker, the air more charged. It was as if the city itself had drawn a curtain across the horizon, leaving behind only a patch of swirling, stormy sky. Oren felt the pull intensify as they neared the edge of the floating spire. He could see it now, the Mistral, a cloud-like being hovering in the sky, outlined by lightning and shadow. Its form was ever shifting, the edges unclear, as if it existed in more than one place at once. Winds howled around it, pulling in every direction, but its core remained steady. The Mistral turned to face them as if it had known they were coming. There was no face, only swirling light and dark, a constant dance of wind and mist. But somehow, Oren knew it was looking directly at him. You have arrived, the Mistral's voice boomed, not with sound, but with presence. Or's chest vibrated with its power, the very air thickening around him. I am Oren Thistlewind, he said, his voice shaking slightly, though he fought to remain steady. I seek the truth of the breach. The Mistral's form shifted, the wind swirling around it faster, louder, almost as if it were laughing. Truth. Truth is not a thing to be found, boy. It is a thing to be unraveled. What do you mean? The breach is not an event. It is not a time. It is a place. And it is inside you, as it is inside all things, the Mistral intoned. You wish to understand it? Then you must learn to listen not with your ears, but with your spirit. Oren felt a sharp pull inside his chest, the wind tightening around him as if it were trying to pull him into its swirling form. He staggered, fighting to stay grounded. Do not fear the storm, the Mistral whispered. It is part of you. You were born of it. Lyra stepped forward. The Mistral speaks true. The breach is not just a rift in the sky, it is the rupture between all things. It binds everything together. The dreamers, the winds, the worlds themselves. Oren's mind swirled with the enormity of what he was hearing. But, how can it be inside me? I've never. The Mistral's form expanded, its wind force growing stronger, until the very fabric of space seemed to warp around them. Oren's vision flickered, and for a moment, he was no longer standing in Numenez. He was floating through an endless storm. He saw faces of people, beings, worlds, each one flickering in and out of existence. His mother, his sister, the distant figure of himself as a child. All of them, dancing on the edge of time, woven into the fabric of the universe itself. Do you see? The Mistral's voice echoed through his mind. The breach is the space between moments. The space between thoughts, between breaths, between hearts. It is where all things meet, and where all things end. Oren gasped, pulling himself back from the visions. But why? Why is it happening now? What is it trying to do? It is not trying to do anything, the Mistral replied, the wind softening. It is simply being. And you are the one who will decide whether it remains in balance, or whether it unravels completely. The sky around them shifted again, and Oren found himself back in Numenez, standing at the base of the Mistral. The air was still now, but heavy with the weight of knowledge. What must I do? He asked. The Mistral paused, the wind swirling into a calm, steady rhythm. You must find the others. The Skikken. They are scattered across the realms, waiting to be awakened. Each one carries a key to stabilizing the breach. Find them, and the storm will return to its natural order. But how will I know them? Oren asked, his voice uncertain. They will know you, the Mistral responded. The wind calls to its own. With that, the Mistral's form began to dissipate into the stormy sky, leaving behind only the faintest trace of its presence. Lyra approached, her eyes serious. The path is clear. We must seek the first of the Skikken. They will help guide you on your journey. Oren took a deep breath, his mind racing. And where do we find them? Not far, Lyra said. But it will take us through the heart of the storm itself. To the place where the winds first parted the eye of the storm. Oren nodded. He had already felt the weight of the journey ahead. The breach was not just a rift in space, but a force that tore through everything, and it was up to him to heal it. He had never asked for this responsibility, but now that he had embraced it, there was no turning back. The winds began to pick up again, gently this time, as if the sky itself was guiding him onward. And with that, Oren Thistlewind, the boy who had been born from the winds, stepped forward into the storm, his journey just beginning. Act 9, Into the Eye of the Storm. The winds howled as they traveled deeper into the heart of the storm. Oren and Lyra stood together at the bow of the skiff, the vessel cutting through the thickening clouds like a blade through water. The air was dense with energy, and the storm swirled around them, its intensity growing with every passing minute. It wasn't just a storm. It was a presence, alive and aware. Oren could feel its pull, the pressure in his chest, the trembling of the ground beneath his feet. He had been through the winds of Numenez before, but nothing had ever felt like this. The eye of the storm was not just a place, it was the beating heart of the breach itself. Lyra didn't speak as they sailed deeper into the chaos, but Oren could sense her resolve. She had always been the calm to his storm, but now, even she seemed unsettled by the energy around them. Her eyes were fixed on the swirling vortex ahead, where the winds twisted into a funnel of lightning and shadow. "There," Lyra said, breaking the silence. "We are nearing the eye." Oren's heart raced. The eye was said to be a place of balance, a calm within the storm where the Skikken gathered. But it was also a place where the breach was most potent. The Mistral had told him to seek the Skikken, but Oren wasn't sure what to expect. These beings, born of the winds, were ancient and powerful. He had no idea if they would accept him, or if they would even be willing to help him stop the breach. The skiff rocked violently as they entered the heart of the storm. The winds screamed, whipping around them like 1,000 blades, and the sky darkened. The clouds above twisted into shapes that were both beautiful and terrifying shadows of ancient creatures, of forgotten gods, of spirits lost to time. Oren could feel the pressure building in his ears, in his chest, as if the very air itself was alive with anticipation. And then, the clouds parted. Before them, a massive structure rose from the swirling chaos, a towering spire of cloudstone, ancient and weathered. It was the eye of the storm, a place where the winds calmed, a sanctuary hidden deep within the chaos. The skiff slowed as they approached, coming to rest on a platform of solid cloudstone. Oren stepped off the vessel and felt his feet sink slightly into the soft surface. The wind still howled around him, but here, it was different. It was like the calm before the storm, an unnatural stillness that held everything in balance. "Stay close," Lyra whispered as she led him forward. The eye of the storm was like nothing Oren had ever seen. The air here was thick with history, as if the very winds carried the weight of time itself. The spire before them was adorned with carvings of ancient symbols that seemed to shift and change as Oren looked at them, as if they were alive. At the base of the spire stood a figure tall, cloaked in winds that seemed to bend around them, and eyes that glowed like the heart of a storm. The figure was surrounded by a swirling vortex of light and shadow, but they stood perfectly still, as though untouched by the chaos around them. "Oren Thistlewind," the figure said, their voice like the sound of thunder rolling across the sky. "We have been waiting for you." Oren's heart skipped a beat. He had heard stories of the Skikken, but this was the first time he had come face to face with one. This being, standing in the heart of the storm, was more than just a person. They were a manifestation of the winds, a creature born of the storm itself. "You are the one who will decide the fate of Numenez," the figure continued, their voice carrying the weight of 1,000 storms. "The breach is a rift in the very fabric of existence. And you, Oren Thistlewind, are the one who will either mend it or tear it apart." Oren took a step forward, his voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "I've been chosen to stop the breach. But I don't know how." The figure nodded, their eyes piercing through him like a storm's eye. "You are not alone in this. The Skikken will stand with you. But first, you must prove that you understand the nature of the storm." Oren frowned. "What do you mean?" "You must face the heart of the storm," the figure said. "You must confront your own fear, your own doubt. The breach is not just a physical rift. It is a rift within your soul, within every soul. If you cannot face it within yourself, you will never be able to heal the world. The winds around Oren grew louder, the pressure increasing, as though the storm itself was pushing him forward. His heart raced in his chest, and for a moment, he felt the overwhelming weight of the task ahead. What do I have to do? Oren asked. Face the storm within, the figure replied. Only then will the winds reveal the path forward. Oren closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He had faced many trials already, but this was different. This was no physical challenge. It was something deeper, something more personal. He had been running from his fears for so long, avoiding the storm inside him, but now he had to confront it. The wind howled around him, and in his mind's eye, he saw a vision. A vision of himself as a child, standing on the edge of a cliff, watching the storm approach. His parents called to him from below, urging him to come down, but he hesitated. The storm was terrifying, and he was afraid of what might happen if he moved forward. But the longer he waited, the more the storm intensified, until the winds were ripping at his clothes and the sky was filled with the roar of thunder. He saw his younger self, standing frozen in fear. And then, he understood. Oren stepped forward, eyes open, heart steady. He wasn't afraid anymore. He knew what he had to do. The wind stopped. For the first time since he had entered the eye of the storm, everything was still. The figure before him nodded, and the storm began to calm. You have faced your fear, the Skicken said. Now, the storm will guide you. The winds shifted, moving in a new direction. The air hummed with energy, and Oren felt a new power within him. The path ahead was clear. The breach was not just an external force, it was something that resided within him, something he had to face and heal before he could heal the world. The Mistral had spoken the truth. The storm was part of him. And now, with the Skicken by his side, Oren would face it, not just for himself, but for Numenez and the worlds beyond. Act 10, Mending the Breach. The storm had settled, but Oren could still feel its presence lingering in the air. The winds had grown quieter, but they still hummed with power, as if waiting for something. Waiting for him. Beside him, the figure of the Skicken, the being who had helped guide him to this point, now stood still, its form swirling like a cloud caught in the throes of a storm. Oren could feel its gaze upon him, piercing and vast, yet oddly comforting. The breach is not just an external force, the Skicken intoned, its voice a combination of wind and thunder. It is a rift in the heart of reality. A tear in the very fabric of existence. You, Oren Thistlewind, are the only one who can heal it. Oren swallowed. The weight of the words hung heavy in the air, and for a moment, he felt the full magnitude of the task ahead of him. He wasn't just trying to stop a storm, he was facing the very essence of imbalance, a force that threatened to tear apart the worlds themselves. How? Oren asked, his voice steady but filled with uncertainty. How do I heal the breach? The breach is a reflection of the storm inside all things, the Skicken replied. To mend it, you must first heal the storm within yourself. Only then can you mend the world around you. Oren nodded slowly, understanding the weight of the task. The storm within him, his fears, his doubts, had been with him for as long as he could remember. He had run from it, hidden from it, but now, he had to face it head on. And the only way to do that was to confront the darkness that lay within. You must confront the heart of the storm, the Skicken said, its voice growing softer. The place where the breach begins. The eye. Oren felt his breath catch in his throat. The eye of the storm, the place where the winds of creation and destruction met. It was the heart of the breach, and he had to go there to heal it. Lyra stepped forward, her expression solemn but resolute. We will go with you, she said. The Skicken will guide us. But this is your journey, Oren. You are the one who must heal the breach. Oren looked at her, the weight of her words sinking in. He had never asked for this responsibility, but now, he knew he couldn't turn away. He was part of the storm, and it was time to mend what had been torn apart. Lead the way, he said, his voice steady. The Skicken nodded, and with a sweep of its hand, the winds began to stir once again. This time, the air felt different. It was no longer just a force of destruction. It was a force of creation, of healing. Oren could feel the winds within him, stirring the storm inside his soul, but this time, he didn't resist it. He welcomed it. Together, they made their way to the eye of the storm, the heart of the breach. The winds grew stronger as they approached, and Oren could feel the tension building in the air. He was getting closer to the heart of it all. As they reached the center of the eye, the storm around them quieted once more. The winds no longer raged. They hummed, steady and rhythmic, like the breath of the world itself. And there, in the center of the eye, Oren saw it. The breach. It was not a physical rift, but a tear in the fabric of reality, a swirling vortex of light and shadow. It pulsed with energy, a constant ebb and flow, like the heartbeat of the universe itself. Oren stepped forward, his heart racing. He could feel the storm inside him, the fear and the doubt, swirling like a vortex. It was the same storm that had plagued him for as long as he could remember. But now, he had to face it. He had to heal it. With a deep breath, Oren closed his eyes and reached out. He could feel the wind stirring around him, responding to his presence. The storm within him began to calm, the chaos settling into a steady rhythm. And then, he heard it. A voice. Not from the Mistral. Not from the Skicken. But from within him. You are the storm. And you are the calm. Oren's eyes flew open. The breach before him pulsed once more, and he felt it, he understood it. The breach was not just a rift. It was a part of him, a part of all things. It was the place where creation and destruction met. The storm was not something to be fought, it was something to be embraced, to be understood. With a final, steady breath, Oren reached into the heart of the breach. The winds responded. The storm inside him unraveled, and in its place, a calmness spread through the air. The breach began to heal, the vortex of light and shadow fading as the storm within it settled. And then, as if a weight had been lifted from the world, the winds fell silent. The eye of the storm was still. Oren stood at the center of it, his heart steady and calm. The storm within him had been healed, and with it, the breach had been mended. Lyra stepped forward, her eyes filled with awe. "You did it?" The Skicken nodded. "The storm has passed. The breach is healed. But this is not the end. It is the beginning of a new journey." Oren looked around him, the calm wind swirling gently around him. The sky above was clear, the air fresh and full of possibility. "We must now rebuild," the Skicken said. "But you have shown us that healing begins within. You have healed the breach. Now, you must help others do the same." Oren nodded. He knew that the journey ahead would not be easy. The world would not heal overnight. But for the first time, he felt ready. He was no longer running from the storm. He had become the calm. Together, with the Skicken, with Lyra, Oren would rebuild what had been broken. And in time, Numenez would flourish again, no longer torn apart by the storm, but united by the winds of change. Act 11, Rebuilding the Sky. The winds had calmed, but the work was only just beginning. The breach, once a rift tearing through the fabric of reality, had been healed. Yet, Oren knew the storm within the world was not fully settled. He had faced his own fear, his own darkness, and had mended what had been broken within him. But the world around him, the city of Numenez, the realms beyond, remained fragile. The winds of change were still blowing, and they needed direction. Oren stood at the edge of the sky well, watching as the sunless sky of Numenez stretched endlessly before him. The city shimmered in the distance, its floating spires and paths of light a reminder of what had been saved. But he could feel the weight of the task ahead. Lyra stood beside him, her eyes scanning the horizon. "The breach is no longer a threat," she said softly. "But the winds that tore through the worlds have left scars. We must mend the fabric of reality, thread by thread." Oren nodded. "But how do we begin?" "You've already started," Lyra replied. "The Skicken will guide us. But there are others out there, other dreamers who can help. Those who hold the power of the winds, the storm, the calm." Oren turned to her, his gaze steady. "And where do we find them?" Lyra's expression was unreadable, but there was a flicker of resolve in her eyes. "There are places hidden away, scattered across the realms. The storm watchers, the wind shapers, the cloud-born. Each holds a piece of the puzzle. But finding them will not be easy. Some of them have faded into legend. Others may not even remember what they are. Oren took a deep breath. The journey ahead would be long and uncertain. But there was no turning back now. He had mended the breach, but the world was still broken, and it needed to be healed. "We'll find them," he said with conviction. Lyra nodded. "I believe in you." Together, they set out to gather the scattered forces of Numinous and beyond. Days turned into weeks. Oren traveled with Lyra and the Skikken, seeking out the first of the wind shapers. Their journey took them to distant lands, places where the winds whispered ancient secrets and the storms held their breath. Each encounter with a new group of wind-born folk brought them closer to understanding the true depth of the storm that had once torn through the realms. The first group they found were the wind shapers, a mysterious people who could control the direction of the winds themselves. They lived in a floating city of glass and mist, suspended high above a desolate desert. The city was built into the bones of a great mountain, its spires carved from the very stone of the earth. The wind shapers welcomed Oren and Lyra, but they were wary. "You seek to heal the storm," said the leader of the wind shapers, an elderly man with eyes like the storm clouds. "But the winds are not easily tamed. They are both creation and destruction. They are not a force that can be controlled by will alone." Oren nodded, understanding the weight of the words. "I don't seek to control the winds. I seek to understand them." The wind shapers tested Oren, pushing him to his limits. They took him to the highest peak of their city, where the winds howled with such force that even the sky seemed to bend. There, they asked him to summon the wind, to guide it, to understand its flow. It was a test not of strength, but of connection. Could he truly understand the winds, or would he be consumed by them? Oren closed his eyes and reached deep within himself. The storm inside him stirred, but this time, he didn't resist it. He let the winds of Numinous swirl around him, feel their pulse, their rhythm. He understood them. And with that understanding, he called the wind to him not as a force to be controlled, but as a partner in the journey ahead. The winds responded. Gently, at first, and then with increasing force. They swirled around Oren, lifting him into the air, until he stood with the wind shapers, high above the desert below. "You are the one," the leader of the wind shapers said, his voice filled with awe. "You have understood the storm. You have understood the wind." Oren felt a sense of peace wash over him. The storm had been inside him, but now, he had learned to listen to it, to work with it. He had taken the first step in mending the world. Weeks passed, and Oren and Lyra traveled farther, meeting more groups of wind-born folk, each with their own unique connection to the storm. They found the Storm Watchers, a tribe that lived on the edges of the world, where the winds were strongest and the storms raged without mercy. They taught Oren to see the storm as a force of creation, a cycle of life and death. They showed him how to harness the energy of the storm, not to control it, but to protect the realms from its destruction. Next, they sought out the Cloudborn, a people who had once lived in the highest reaches of Numenez, but had retreated into the clouds after the breach. They lived in a city suspended between the worlds, where the sky itself was their home. The Cloudborn had the power to shape the very fabric of the air, to create storms that could cleanse the land or bring forth new life. Orin learned from each of them, growing stronger, wiser, and more connected to the winds that had once torn the world apart. But he knew that his journey was not over. The storm was still out there, waiting to be healed. And with each step, Orin came closer to understanding the true nature of the breach and the power that lay within him to heal it. Days turned into months. Orin stood at the edge of the world, looking out over the horizon. The winds had grown stronger, the storm more intense. But now, he was ready. The Skicken, the Wind Shapers, the Storm Watchers, and the Cloudborn all had taught him what he needed to know. It was time to face the heart of the storm. The breach still loomed in the distance, but Orin no longer feared it. He had become the storm. And now, he was ready to heal it. Lyra stood beside him, her eyes filled with quiet pride. "The time has come," she said softly. Orin nodded, his heart steady. "Let's go." Together, they stepped into the storm. Act 12, The Heart of the Storm. The storm was no longer just a force of nature. It was a presence, an entity with purpose. Orin could feel it now, deep inside his bones. The winds had grown wild, thrashing around them as they moved toward the epicenter of the breach. He had come so far, learned so much, but the final test still loomed ahead. The world felt thin here, as if the very fabric of reality was fraying. The wind screamed and howled, swirling around him like a living thing. It was a storm that didn't just rage across the skies, it tore through time and space itself. He could feel it pulling at the edges of his mind, whispering doubts and fears, tugging at the memories of his past, threatening to drag him into the chaos. But he wasn't afraid anymore. He had faced the storm within himself. He had learned to understand it, to listen to it, and now, he had to heal the breach, not just for him, but for everyone. Lyra stood beside him, her presence steady and calm amidst the maelstrom. "We are close now, Orin. The heart of the storm is just ahead." Orin nodded, his grip tightening on the pendant around his neck. The piece of sky that had been with him since the beginning, the symbol of his journey. It had been shattered, absorbed into him, but its power was still with him. It was the key to understanding the storm, the final piece of the puzzle. They stood at the edge of the eye of the storm, the very core of the breach. It was unlike anything Orin had ever seen. The sky above was a swirl of lightning and shadow, a vortex of raw, untamed energy. The winds here were unlike any he had felt before. They were cold and biting, cutting through him like knives. But there, in the center of it all, was the breach, an enormous tear in the sky itself, a rift so wide and deep that Oren couldn't even see the other side. He stepped forward, his heart pounding in his chest. The storm roared around him, but this time, he wasn't afraid. This was the moment he had been preparing for, the moment when he would confront the heart of the storm and heal the world. Lyra stepped beside him, her eyes glowing with quiet determination. "This is it," she said softly. "You must face it now. The breach is not just a rift in the sky, it's a rift in the hearts of all those who live in this world. You must heal it from within." Oren nodded. He had known this all along, but now it was time to put it into action. He had faced his own darkness, his own fears. Now, he had to face the storm within the world itself. He reached out, feeling the winds pull at him. The storm grew stronger, the rift in the sky widening as he drew closer. It was as if the world itself was pushing back, refusing to let him heal what had been broken. But Oren didn't stop. He couldn't. This was his responsibility. With a deep breath, Oren closed his eyes and focused. He could feel the wind swirling around him, the energy of the breach pushing against him. But inside, he felt the calm, the steady rhythm of his heart, the pulse of the storm within him. He reached deep inside, connecting to the wind, to the sky, to the storm. And then, he let go. The storm surged, and for a moment, Oren felt like he was being torn apart. The wind screamed, the rift in the sky howled, and the world around him spun out of control. But Oren held on. He didn't fight it. He became it. The winds of Numenez, the winds of his own soul, began to align. The storm, the chaos, the rift, they were all one. And in that moment, Oren understood. The storm was not something to fight, but something to heal. It was a force of creation and destruction, and both were needed to restore balance. With that realization, Oren reached out to the breach. He didn't try to close it. He didn't try to force it. Instead, he understood it. And in that understanding, the storm began to shift. The rift in the sky pulsed, the energy inside it shifting from chaos to harmony. The winds that had been tearing at the world slowed, their violent energy turning into a gentle breeze. The sky above began to clear, the swirling darkness fading into soft light. The storm, once a force of destruction, was now a force of creation. Oren's chest heaved with exhaustion, but he felt a deep sense of peace. The breach had been healed. The storm had been mended. But the work was not done. Lyra stepped forward, her face a mix of awe and relief. "You've done it. The world is whole again." Oren looked around. The sky was clear now, the winds gentle and steady. The storm had passed, but its mark would remain. He had healed the rift, but the world was still fragile. It would need time to rebuild, to recover. And Oren would be there to help guide it. "The storm is not over," Oren said softly. "But we have learned to live with it." We have learned to heal it. Lyra nodded, her expression proud. Yes, Orin. You have not only healed the breach, you have shown us how to live with the storm. And now, we will rebuild. Orin turned toward the horizon, feeling the weight of the journey ahead. The world was whole again, but it would need time to heal. And Orin would be there to guide it. Together, with Lyra, with the Skicken, with the wind at his back, Orin Thistlewind would rebuild the world. The storm had passed, but a new journey had begun. Act 13, Rebuilding the Winds. Numinous stood still, its skies now clear, its winds no longer chaotic but gentle. Orin had mended the breach, and the storm that had once torn the fabric of the world was now a distant memory. The rift in the sky had closed, the energies swirling around them had found balance, and the vast city that had once been threatened by the storm was now bathed in a calm light. But healing was never as simple as just fixing something. The storm had left its scars, its mark on the land and its people. Orin could feel it deep within the very heart of Numinous. There was still an undercurrent of unrest, as though the world was waiting for the next phase of its recovery. Lyra stood beside him, looking out over the expanse of the city. The floating spires of Numinous shimmered in the early light, their crystalline structures glistening like jewels against the calm sky. The streets below were teeming with life once more, the cloud-born folk moving about their business with a renewed sense of purpose. It feels quieter, Orin said, his voice filled with a mixture of relief and uncertainty. Lyra nodded. It is. The storm has passed, but the world is still rebuilding. The winds of Numinous are stable again, but the damage the storm caused emotionally, spiritually will take time to heal. Orin clenched his fists at his sides. He had faced the storm within himself, and now, he had to help the world do the same. But where to begin? The Skicken had helped him understand the storm, and the lessons they had learned had shaped him into something new, something different. But he couldn't rebuild the world alone. We need to gather the others, Orin said finally. The Skicken, the Wind Shapers, the Cloudborn, there's more to be done. Lyra smiled faintly. You've already begun, Orin. You've shown us how to live with the storm, how to heal. Now we must spread that knowledge. The world needs to understand that balance is not about forcing the winds to stop, but about learning to work with them. Orin turned toward the horizon, his mind racing with possibilities. The world was no longer in immediate danger, but it was not whole yet. There were still wounds to be healed, still storms to navigate. The breach had been healed, but the balance of the world of the realms was still fragile. If he was to help the world truly heal, he needed to bring together the scattered forces that had once lived in harmony with the winds. We'll need to go beyond Numinous, Orin said, determination rising in his chest. There are others out there, other realms, other dreamers, other forces of nature. They are part of this world, too. And we must bring them together. Lyra nodded. The winds have carried you far, Orin. but the journey is far from over. There are still places, hidden deep in the heart of the storm, where the winds have not settled. We must go there, and we must bring the lost ones home. Oren felt the pull again, that familiar pressure in his chest, the storm that had always been inside him, whispering of what was yet to come. The winds of Numinous had calmed, but there were still forces at play, forces that needed to be understood and tamed. They set out immediately, traveling to the edges of Numinous. Oren had learned much about the storm, about the winds that had shaped the world, but there was still more to discover. The Skikken, the wind shapers, the Cloudborn, each of them held a key, a piece of the puzzle. But the world was vast, and they could not do this alone. Their journey took them first to the wind shapers, the ancient people who lived among the floating islands in the high skies. The wind shapers had once been guardians of the winds, wielding the power to guide the storms, to shape the very air. But after the breach, they had retreated, hiding away in their isolated homes, away from the chaos that had ravaged Numinous. When they arrived, Oren was greeted by the wind shaper elder, a tall figure cloaked in the mist of the high winds. The elder's eyes were clouded with age, yet there was a sharpness in them that betrayed a lifetime of wisdom. "You have come," the elder said, his voice like the wind itself. "The winds of Numinous have not been the same since the storm passed. We have felt it. The storm was not just a rift between realms, it was a rift within the winds themselves. They are not fully healed." Oren nodded. "That's why we've come. We need your help. We need to bring the winds back to balance." The wind shaper elder studied him for a moment, then turned toward the horizon. "The winds are not easy to control, nor are they meant to be controlled. The storm taught us that. But the winds can be guided. And we will guide them with you." With the wind shaper's guidance, Oren learned how to harness the power of the winds in new ways. He had already learned the lesson of balance within himself, but now he learned to extend that balance to the world around him. The wind shapers taught him to listen to the currents, to understand the ebb and flow of the air that connected all things. Together, they began to restore the balance that had been lost. The winds of Numinous grew steadier, more harmonious, as the wind shapers guided them. The storms that had once torn through the world were now held at bay, not by force, but by understanding. But this was only the beginning. Act 14, The Winds of Unity. Numinous was no longer the same. Its skies were calm, its winds steady, but the work of rebuilding was far from complete. The people had begun to heal, the forces of nature were regaining balance, but Oren knew that the journey ahead would not be an easy one. The storm may have passed, but the scars it left behind remained. The winds were not yet fully healed, and there were still pieces of the puzzle missing. After their time with the wind shapers, Oren and Lyra set out to seek the next force, the Cloudborn, a people who had once lived in the highest reaches of Numinous, beyond the floating cities. They had retreated into the clouds after the breach, their connection to the storm severed. But Oren knew that to restore balance to Numinous, they would need the Cloudborn. The journey to find the Cloudborn was long, but it took them deep into the heart of Numinous. The path was not clear, but the winds whispered of their presence. Every step they took, every gust of wind they felt, led them closer. The journey felt more like a pilgrimage, not just for the Cloudborn, but for Orin himself. As they climbed higher into the sky, the air grew thinner, the winds grew stronger. The world below them seemed to recede as they ascended. Soon, they were traveling through a vast expanse of clouds, their path winding through billowing mists and swirling vapor. And then, they saw it. A massive city of clouds, suspended in the sky like a dream. The Cloudborn had built their homes within the clouds, their city a labyrinth of bridges and towers, woven from the very air itself. It was a place of peace, of quiet beauty, suspended between worlds. But as they approached, Orin could feel the absence. The Cloudborn were not what they once were. Their connection to the storms had been severed. At the city's entrance stood a figure, taller than Orin had expected, their body glowing with an ethereal light. Their wings were not wings of flesh, but of pure cloud, soft, billowing, and translucent. The figure's face was calm, serene, yet it carried the weight of centuries. "You have come," the figure said, their voice soft yet commanding. "You seek the Cloudborn?" Orin nodded. "We do. We need your help to restore balance to the winds. The storm that once ravaged this world has left scars, and only by uniting all of us can we heal it." The figure studied him for a long moment. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, they extended their hand. "You are not the first to seek our aid. Many have come before you. But none have truly understood what it means to heal the storm." Orin felt a shift in the air, a pull that drew him closer to the Cloudborn. There was something powerful about their presence, something ancient. They had lived in the heart of the storm, and now they had withdrawn. Their power was still there, but it was dormant, waiting for something or someone to awaken it. "What do you mean?" Orin asked. The Cloudborn leader, who introduced themselves as Seraphiel, stepped forward. The storm was not only a physical force. It was a reflection of the imbalance within all things. We Cloudborn were the guardians of the winds, the protectors of balance. But when the breach tore through the world, it shattered the connection we had with the storm. And with it, we lost our purpose. Lyra stepped forward, her eyes searching Seraphiel's face. "But you still hold the key to restoring balance, don't you? You are the ones who can guide us through the storm." Seraphiel's expression softened, but their gaze remained distant. "We once controlled the storm. But we cannot control it any longer. The winds no longer respond to our call. The storm's energy is wild, chaotic. And it will take more than just the Cloudborn to tame it." Orin stepped closer, feeling the weight of Seraphiel's words. The Cloudborn had once been the keepers of the skies, the weavers of the winds. But now, they were lost. Their power was dormant, waiting for a spark to reignite it. "You've lost your connection to the winds," Oren said softly. But you haven't lost your purpose. You are still a part of the storm, just as much as we are. Seraphil looked at him, their eyes narrowing slightly. You speak the truth, young one. The storm is not something we control. It is something we are with. We are part of the winds, just as the winds are part of us. Oren extended his hand, mirroring the gesture Seraphil had made earlier. Then let's work together. Let's reawaken the storm. We are all part of it, and only together can we heal it. For a moment, there was silence. The winds shifted, the air growing still. Then, slowly, Seraphil stepped forward, placing their hand in Oren's. The moment their hands touched, the world seemed to shift. A surge of energy flooded through Oren, a deep, primal force that resonated with the storm within him. The cloud-born city began to stir. The buildings made of cloudstone shimmered, glowing with a soft, ethereal light. The very air seemed to hum with the energy of the storm. Oren felt the winds respond to him, the storm inside him waking once more. Seraphil looked at him, their eyes filled with both awe and sadness. It has begun, they said softly. The storm is waking again. But this time, we will guide it, not control it. Oren nodded, feeling the storm within him grow stronger. Together, we can heal it. Together, we can restore balance. And so, with the cloud-born by his side, Oren set out on the next stage of his journey. The storm had been healed, but the winds were not yet in balance. The forces that had once shaped the world were still fractured, still in need of unity. But with the cloud-born's power, the wind shaper's wisdom, and the Skiken's guidance, Oren knew they could rebuild. Act 15, The Gathering Storm. The world of Numenez was changing. The sky was no longer a place of fear, but of potential. The winds, once erratic and destructive, had begun to settle, their wild energy now flowing with purpose. The breach had been healed, but the balance was still fragile. There were still remnants of the storm left to mend, still forces scattered across the realms that held the power to either restore or tear apart everything they had fought for. Oren stood atop the highest spire of Numenez, looking out over the world. The air was calm, but the weight of the task ahead pressed down on him. The gathering storm was not just a metaphor, it was a reality, and the forces that had once shaped the world were stirring once more. Beside him stood Lyra, her expression steady. She had been with him through every trial, every challenge, and now, together, they would face the final test. It's time, Oren said quietly, his voice barely more than a whisper. The winds are calling. We must find the others. Lyra nodded. The Skiken, the wind shapers, the cloudborn all have played their part. Now, it's time to unite the scattered forces and restore balance. Only then can we be sure that the storm will not return. Oren turned to her, feeling the weight of her words. The world had been on the brink of destruction, and it had been his journey to heal it. but he knew now that he couldn't do it alone. The storm was not just a force of nature, it was a force of will, a power that transcended time and space. And to heal it, he needed the strength of all the realms, all the winds. "We need to find the last piece," Oren said, his gaze steady. "The storm watchers. The ones who guard the balance of the realms. They are the key to restoring the winds fully." Lyra's eyes narrowed slightly, her brow furrowing in thought. "The storm watchers are elusive. They are guardians of the most powerful winds, the ones that control the boundaries between worlds. They do not seek to intervene unless the balance is truly at risk. And right now, it's at risk," Oren replied, determination rising in his chest. "We've seen the damage the breach caused. We've seen what happens when the storm goes unchecked. The time has come for all of us to act." Lyra nodded, and they set out together, leaving Numinous behind as they traveled toward the edge of the known realms, toward the place where the winds of creation and destruction met. Their journey took them deep into the mountains that lay at the edge of the world, where the winds howled and the air grew thin. The storm watchers had not been seen for centuries, and Oren knew that finding them would not be easy. They were the keepers of the most ancient winds, the guardians of the storm that controlled the flow of time itself. The winds grew stronger as they approached the heart of the mountains. The air was charged with energy, and Oren could feel the storm stirring within him. He had learned to control it, to understand it, but this was different. The winds here were ancient, and they carried with them the weight of history. The storm watchers had been the protectors of the storm for as long as the world had existed, and now, they were the key to restoring balance. After days of travel, they arrived at a hidden valley, where the winds were calm, almost serene. The clouds parted, revealing a massive temple carved into the side of a mountain. The structure was ancient, its stone walls worn smooth by the passage of time. Oren could feel the power emanating from it, the same energy that had once shaped the storm. At the entrance stood a figure, cloaked in shadows, their face obscured by a hood. They were waiting for them, as if they had known they would come. "You seek the storm watchers," the figure said, their voice echoing in the stillness. "But the storm watchers do not seek to be found. We have watched over the balance for eons. We do not interfere unless the storm threatens to tear the world apart." Oren stepped forward, his gaze steady. "The storm has already torn the world apart. The breach is healed, but the balance is still fragile. We need your help to restore the winds fully, to make sure that the storm will never threaten the world again." The figure studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. "You are the one who has healed the breach. You have brought the winds back into balance. But the storm is not something to be controlled. It is something to be understood. You have learned that. But there is still one more lesson you must learn." Oren's heart raced as the figure stepped forward, their cloak billowing like the storm itself. "What lesson?" Oren asked. "The storm is not just a force of nature," the figure said, their voice filled with ancient wisdom. It is a force of will. It is shaped by those who wield it. And you, Oren Thistlewind, must learn to wield it fully. You must learn to guide the winds, not just for yourself, but for the world. Only then will the storm be truly healed. Oren's mind swirled with the magnitude of the task ahead. The storm was no longer just something to be feared. It was something to be embraced, something to be understood. He had already learned so much, but this was the final step, the final lesson. To truly heal the storm, he would have to become one with it. The figure extended their hand, and Oren took it, feeling a surge of energy flood through him. The winds of the world rushed around him, and for a moment, he felt as though he was one with them. The storm inside him grew stronger, its power flowing through his veins. "You are ready," the figure said, their voice filled with approval. "Now, you must lead the winds. You must guide them to restore balance to the world." Oren stood at the heart of the Storm Watcher's temple, surrounded by the winds of creation and destruction. The storm was no longer something to fear. It was a force to be understood, to be wielded with wisdom and strength. With the guidance of the Storm Watchers, Oren knew that he could now control the storm, not to destroy, but to heal. He had learned to live with the winds, to embrace them, and now, he would lead them to restore balance. Lyra stood beside him, her eyes filled with pride and hope. "The world is ready," she said softly. "The storm is ready. And you, Oren, are ready." Oren looked out over the horizon, feeling the winds at his back. The world had been healed, but the journey was far from over. The storm had passed, but it was still a part of him, a part of the world. And together, they would guide it, not as a force of destruction, but as a force of creation. The winds had been with him since the beginning. And now, they would carry him forward, into the future. Act 16, The Winds of Destiny. Oren stood at the edge of the world, feeling the winds swirl around him as if they were alive. The energy in the air was different now. It was charged, humming with the weight of responsibility. The storm that had once torn the world apart had been healed, but the winds, their power still surged beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to be guided. His journey had begun with uncertainty and fear. The storm had been an obstacle, an overwhelming force. But now, it was his ally. The winds were not something to be fought or controlled, they were something to be understood. And Oren had learned that lesson well. Now, the time had come to step into the role he had been chosen for, to guide the winds, to lead the realms, and to ensure that the balance would never again be broken. Lyra stood beside him, her presence calm and steady. She had been with him every step of the way, and now, more than ever, her support felt like the anchor that kept him grounded. "You've come far, Oren," Lyra said softly, her voice filled with pride. "The world is healing. The storm has passed, but it's not over. There's still work to be done." Oren nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The sky was clear, but the winds still carried with them the weight of their journey. They had learned to understand the storm, but now they had to ensure that the forces of nature, of creation and destruction, remained in balance. And for that, Oren knew, he had to unite the scattered realms and their people. "We need to bring them together," Oren said, his voice steady with resolve. "The wind shapers, the cloudborn, the skicken, the storm watchers. We've learned so much from each of them, but now we must unite them. Only then can we ensure that the storm remains in balance, that the winds are controlled, but free." Lyra nodded. "We will need their wisdom, their strength. But more than that, we need to show them that we are ready, that we are united. The world can no longer afford to remain fractured." Oren took a deep breath, feeling the wind stir around him. The time for waiting was over. The world had already paid a heavy price, and he could not allow the balance to falter again. The forces of nature had been united in chaos. Now, it was time to unite them in peace. The gathering of the realms. Oren and Lyra traveled across Numenez, seeking out the leaders of each realm, the beings who had once shaped the winds, the storm, and the skies. Their journey took them to the distant corners of the world, to the places where the winds were the most powerful, where the storms had once raged the fiercest. They needed to bring together the wind shapers, the cloudborn, the skicken, and the storm watchers. Each of them had a key role to play in ensuring the balance of the world was restored. The first to answer the call were the wind shapers, the ancient people who controlled the winds. They had once been the keepers of the storms, the protectors of the skies, but after the breach, they had retreated to the highest peaks of the world, away from the chaos that had engulfed Numenez. Oren had learned much from them already, but now, he needed them more than ever. They arrived at the floating city of the wind shapers, a city suspended high above the ground, where the winds were strongest and the storms raged the most fiercely. The wind shapers were a people of quiet wisdom, their connection to the winds deep and unbroken. When they saw Oren, their leader, Arinder, stepped forward, his eyes filled with a mix of respect and curiosity. "You have healed the storm," Arinder said, his voice filled with awe. "But the winds are not yet fully restored. We must work together, all of us, if we are to ensure the balance is maintained." Oren nodded. "We can't do it alone. We need your help, Arinder. The world needs all of us. The storm was only the beginning. The winds must be united, and we must guide them together." Arinder looked to his people, who stood behind him, their eyes filled with uncertainty. But after a long moment of silence, the elder nodded. "Then let us begin. We will stand with you, Oren Thistlewind, but you must lead us." The unification of forces. The Cloudborn, the Skicken, and the Storm Watchers each responded in kind, coming together in a great meeting at the heart of Numenez. It was a historic gathering, one that had not occurred in centuries. The forces of the storm, the winds of creation and destruction, were united once more. The gathering was held beneath the great dome of Numenez, where the winds of the world seemed to converge, swirling above the people in a great cloud of energy. Leaders from each of the realms stood before Oren, their faces filled with hope, determination, and doubt. Each one held a different piece of the puzzle, a different part of the storm. Together, they had the power to guide it. But alone, they had been lost. "We are not the same," Oren said, his voice echoing in the vast chamber. "But we are all part of the storm. We are all part of the winds. We cannot let our differences tear us apart again. We must work together, not just to control the storm, but to understand it. To heal it." The Skikan leader, Calren, stepped forward, his form shifting like a living storm. "We have been guardians of the winds for eons. But we cannot control what we do not understand. Oren, you have shown us how to listen to the storm, to understand it. We will stand with you." The Cloudborn leader, Seraphiel, spoke next. "We once ruled the skies, shaping the very winds that carry the storms. But the storm we face now is beyond our reach. We will lend our strength to your cause, Oren. Together, we can restore balance." And finally, Vila, the leader of the Storm Watchers, raised her hand. "We have watched over the balance of the worlds for centuries. We have seen the storms rise and fall. But we have never faced a force like this. We will help you guide the winds, Oren. The time has come to unite the forces of nature." With the leaders of the realms standing united before him, Oren felt the weight of the storm shift. The winds, once chaotic and destructive, now felt calm and controlled. The storm had been healed. The winds were ready. The journey had been long, but now, Oren knew that he was not alone. The forces of the world, united under his leadership, had come together to heal the storm. The winds were no longer a force of destruction. They were a force of creation, of balance, of life. The restoration of balance. The final step in the restoration of balance was not just to guide the winds, but to teach the people of Numinous and the realms beyond how to live with the storm. It was not about controlling it, it was about understanding it. The winds were not a threat. They were a part of the world, a part of the cycle of life. And now, Oren would guide the realms in a new era of harmony. The winds of Numinous grew steady, their power no longer a force of chaos, but a force of creation. The realms had been brought together, united under Oren's leadership, and the world began to heal. The storm had passed, and with it, the balance was restored. But Oren knew that this was not the end. It was only the beginning. The winds would always be a part of the world. And it was his responsibility, his duty, to guide them. Together, with Lyra and the united forces of Numinous, Oren would rebuild the world not just by healing the storms, but by teaching the people to live with the winds, to understand their power, and to restore the balance for generations to come. Act 17, Winds of the Future. The storm had passed. The winds, once wild and chaotic, were now in harmony. Oren stood at the edge of the great plains of Numinous, the winds at his back, the vast world before him. He could feel the pulse of the earth beneath him, the hum of the winds around him, and the steady rhythm of the storm that had become a part of him. But now, the work had only just begun. The forces of nature had been united. Skicken, wind shapers, cloudborn, and storm watchers all stood together, a testament to what could be accomplished when balance was restored. Oren had healed the rift, mended the breach, and united the scattered peoples of Numinous. But the task ahead was more than just healing. It was about rebuilding. And rebuilding a world that had been torn apart by chaos was no easy feat. He had faced the storm, both within himself and without. Now, he had to lead a fractured world into a new era of unity, peace, and balance. The winds of Numinous had been tamed, but the world was still fragile. He had seen the devastation that the storm had caused, and the scars it had left on the land and its people. Lyra stood beside him, her eyes focused on the horizon. The winds had calmed, but there was a quiet intensity in her gaze. She had been his constant companion through every trial, every step of this journey. She had helped him face his own fears and doubts, and now, she stood ready to help him lead the world into a new era. "It's time," Oren said, his voice steady. "The world is healing, but we have much work to do." Lyra nodded. "The winds are at peace, but the people of Numinous are not. We must help them rebuild, guide them, and show them how to live with the storm, not fear it." Oren glanced at the people of Numinous below. They had begun to rebuild their homes, their cities, their lives. But there was still fear in the air. Fear of the unknown, fear of what had come before. The storm had torn through their lives, and now, it was up to Oren to help them heal. "We'll start with the cities," Oren said, his voice filled with resolve. "The cities of Numinous are the heart of this world. They were built on the winds, on the power of the storm. But they can't stand alone. We need to unite the people, to teach them how to work with the winds, not against them." Lyra smiled faintly. "You've learned to speak to the winds, Oren. Now, it's time to teach others." Together, they set out on their journey, traveling from city to city, from village to village, bringing the knowledge of the storm to the people. The wind shapers, cloudborn, and Skicken accompanied them, sharing their wisdom, teaching the people how to live in harmony with the winds. It was a slow process, but with every city they visited, the winds grew steadier, the people more at peace. The restoration of the realms. Oren's journey was not just about rebuilding Numinous, it was about restoring the balance of the realms. The storm that had ravaged the world had not only torn through the lands of Numinous, it had reached into other realms, other worlds that were connected by the winds. To restore the balance, Oren knew that he had to unite the realms, to heal the rifts that had been left behind by the chaos. His first stop was the realm of the sky, a place where the winds were born, where the power of the storm had first originated. The Skicken had once been the guardians of the winds, but after the breach, they had retreated into the hidden corners of the realms. Oren needed their help to guide the winds, to teach the other realms how to live with the storm. When they arrived at the entrance to the realm of the sky, Oren could feel the winds shift. They were stronger here, wilder, more untamed. The Skicken, who had lived in the highest reaches of the realms, had withdrawn from the world after the storm. They had watched from afar, waiting for the world to heal. But now, they were ready to step forward. Oren met with Thalorn, the leader of the Skicken. Thalorn's form was both ethereal and solid, a figure of storm and light. His eyes, glowing like the heart of a thunderstorm, met Oren's with an intensity that conveyed both wisdom and sadness. "You have come," Thalorn said, his voice like the rumble of thunder. "The winds have calmed, but the world is not yet healed. You have restored the balance of Numenez, but there is still much work to be done." Oren nodded. "I need your help. We need to unite the realms, to heal the rifts that the storm left behind. The winds must be guided, and the balance must be restored." Thalorn studied him for a long moment, then stepped forward. "You are ready, Oren Thistlewind. You have learned to guide the winds, to understand them. Now, you must help us teach the realms. The storm may have passed, but the winds are still with us. We are part of them, and they are part of us. We must teach the people how to live in harmony with the storm." Oren felt the weight of Thalorn's words. It was not just about healing the storm, it was about guiding it, living with it, and teaching others to do the same. He had learned that lesson himself, but now, he had to share it with the rest of the world. The winds of unity. With Thalorn and the Skicken at his side, Oren traveled to the other realms, uniting the scattered forces of nature. The Cloudborn, the Wind Shapers, the Skicken, and the Storm Watchers, each of them had a unique connection to the storm, a different role to play in the healing of the world. In the realm of the storm, Oren met with Vila, the leader of the Storm Watchers. She had long been a protector of the balance, watching over the winds from the distant reaches of the realms. She had seen the storm's power and knew how dangerous it could be if left unchecked. But she also understood the importance of restoring balance. "We must teach the people," Vila said, her voice like the roar of the wind. "The storm is not something to be controlled. It is a part of us. And if we are to heal the world, we must help the people understand that. The winds must flow freely, but they must be guided." Together, with the Storm Watchers, Oren helped the people of the realm learn how to live with the storm, how to guide the winds rather than fear them. It was a slow process, but with each village they visited, the winds grew steadier. The people began to understand that the storm was not a force of destruction, it was a force of creation, a force of life. The final gathering. At last, Oren stood at the heart of Numenez, surrounded by the leaders of the realms. The Skicken, the Cloudborn, the Wind Shapers, and the Storm Watchers were all united in their mission. The winds had been healed, the balance restored. But the work was not over. The world was still fragile, still in need of guidance. Oren stepped forward, feeling the winds at his back. "We have healed the storm," he said, his voice steady. "But this is only the beginning. The winds are a part of the world, and we are all part of them. We must continue to guide them, to live with them, and to teach the people how to do the same. The leaders of the realms nodded, their eyes filled with determination. They had seen the power of the storm, and they understood that it was their responsibility to guide it. Together, they would lead the people of Numinous and the realms beyond into a new era of balance and harmony. And so, Orin Thistlewind, the leader of the winds, stood at the center of it all, ready to guide the world into a new future, one where the storm was not feared, but embraced. The winds had been healed, and now, they would carry the world forward, into a new age of peace and unity. Act 18, The Path Forward. The winds had settled, their once erratic chaos now a steady hum, a pulse that ran through the very heart of Numinous. The world was healing, but Orin knew that peace was always fragile. The storm might have passed, but the winds that had shaped his destiny had not lost their power. They had become part of him, just as he had become part of them. Standing on the balcony of the Skywell, Orin looked out over Numinous. Below, the city was alive with activity, people moving about their business, rebuilding, reconnecting, and renewing their lives. The once fractured world was now slowly coming together, the scars of the storm still visible but fading as time passed. The task was immense, but Orin knew that the true test had just begun. The winds might be tamed, but the lessons of the storm had not been fully understood by the people. Lyra stood beside him, her gaze soft but thoughtful. The winds played gently with her hair, and the quiet calm around them was almost too peaceful. But Orin could feel the undercurrent of tension in the air. The work was far from over. "I never imagined it would be this peaceful," Orin said, his voice filled with wonder. "But there's something else, something more to do." Lyra nodded, her voice steady. "Yes. The storm is gone, but peace is something we must continually nurture. The winds may be under control, but the world is still recovering. You've brought unity to the realms, but it's not enough. You've shown them how to heal, but now you must show them how to live in harmony with the world they helped shape." Orin turned to face her, his expression serious. "I understand. We've healed the rift, but the next step is more than just restoring the winds. We need to teach the people how to coexist with the forces of nature, how to live without fear of the storm." "Exactly," Lyra replied. "You've been the one to restore balance, Orin. But now, others must carry that responsibility. You cannot do it alone." Orin's mind raced. The journey that had brought him to this point had been long, and every step had been filled with challenges and growth. But this teaching, guiding, and uniting the people of Numinous was the next phase of the storm's healing. They needed to not only understand the storm but to embrace it, to use it as a force for good, not destruction. "We'll begin with the cities," Orin said, determination in his eyes. "Numinous is the heart of this world, and its restoration must begin here. But we must also reach beyond the city walls, to the far corners of the world, to the places where the storm's echoes are still felt. The people need to learn that the winds can be partners, not enemies." Uniting the people. The people of Numinous were resilient, but their fear of the storm still lingered. The lessons of unity that Oren had learned from the wind shapers, the cloudborn, the skicken, and the storm watchers were not enough on their own. It was time for the next step, teaching the people how to live with the winds. Oren and Lyra set out on their mission, traveling across Numinous and beyond to the distant corners of the world, where the winds still carried the traces of the storm. Each city they visited, each village they reached, was a challenge. Some people were open to the lessons they brought, but others were still afraid, still scarred by the chaos of the past. "We have to teach them that the storm is not something to fear," Oren said as they made their way through one such village. "It is part of us, part of the world. The winds are not the enemy. They are life." Lyra nodded, her eyes focused on the village ahead. The people need to understand that the storm was never truly their enemy. It was the imbalance that created it. The forces of nature must be respected, but they also need to be understood. Oren paused, looking out at the village. The people were cautious, their eyes wary as they watched him approach. They had heard the stories of the storm, of the devastation it had caused. It would take time to convince them that the winds could be trusted again. "We must lead by example," Oren said softly. "We must show them that we can live with the winds, not against them. Only then can we begin to restore their faith in the balance." Together, Oren and Lyra worked with the villagers, teaching them how to connect with the winds, how to understand their rhythms and flows. They showed them how to use the winds to improve their lives, how to guide the air to bring crops, to create energy, to transport goods. It was not about controlling the winds. It was about living in harmony with them. The winds of change. Over time, the people began to understand. The winds, once feared, now became a source of life. They used the knowledge of the wind shapers and the cloudborn to guide their agriculture, their commerce, and their communities. The lessons of the skicken helped them learn how to coexist with the forces of nature without fear. And the teachings of the storm watchers ensured that the balance of the world was never again threatened. But there was still much work to be done. As Oren and Lyra traveled, they met with leaders from the farthest reaches of Numinous and beyond. The journey was not just about restoring balance to the winds, it was about restoring balance to the people. The storm had left its mark on every corner of the world, and Oren knew that this work would take generations to complete. In the city of Orevan, they met with Rylan, a leader of a once great nation that had fallen into disarray during the storm. The people of Orevan had lost everything: homes, families, and hopes. But they had not lost their spirit. "You have brought the winds back," Rylan said, his voice low but filled with gratitude. "But the real work begins now. The storm took much from us. And it's not just the land that needs healing. It's the hearts of the people." Oren placed a hand on Rylan's shoulder. "The winds may have caused destruction, but they can also bring renewal. The storm did not take everything. It gave us the opportunity to rebuild, to unite." Together, they worked to heal the people of Orevan, teaching them how to live with the winds, how to guide the storm instead of fearing it. It was a slow process, but every village, every town, every city they visited brought them one step closer to the unity they sought. The final test. The winds were now steady, but the real test was not just to heal the world, it was to keep it in balance. Oren had learned that the storm could not be controlled. It had to be understood, embraced, and guided. But there was one final challenge: the rift between the realms had not been fully healed. The breach was closed, but there were still tears in the fabric of existence. Oren stood at the edge of the ether rift, the place where the realms met. Here, the winds were chaotic, wild, pulling at the very edges of the world. It was the last place where the storm still raged. If he was to complete his journey, he would have to face the rift head-on and restore the balance for good. Lyra stood beside him, her eyes filled with quiet understanding. "This is it, Oren. The storm will test you once more." Oren nodded, his heart steady. "We've healed the world. Now, it's time to heal the rift." Together, they stepped forward, ready to face the storm one last time. Act 19, The Ether Rift. The world had been healed. The winds that had once torn apart the land now flowed in harmony, their once chaotic roars now whispers of calm. The forces of nature had been brought into balance, and Oren had fulfilled his role as the leader of the winds. Yet, as he stood on the edge of the ether rift, he knew there was one last trial he must face, a final test that would determine whether the healing of the world would be permanent. The ether rift was the last place where the storm still raged. The rift had not been fully healed, and the balance between the realms was still fragile. It was here, at the meeting point of all the winds, that the last remnants of the chaos lingered, a tear in the very fabric of existence. The rift was a place where the boundaries between worlds had been shattered, and it was up to Oren to restore the harmony that had been lost. As Oren and Lyra stood at the edge of the rift, the winds howled, swirling in a violent dance of light and shadow. The air was thick with energy, the storm still angry and restless. The winds here were not like those in Numenus, they were wild, untamed, a raw force of nature. "The rift is a tear between the worlds," Lyra said, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "This is where the storm began, and it is here where it must end." Oren nodded, his heart steady. He had come this far. The winds that had once been his enemy had become his ally. He had learned to understand them, to guide them, and to restore balance to the realms. But the rift was different. It was the heart of the storm, the source of all the chaos that had plagued the world. The rift pulsed before him, a swirling vortex of energy and light. The very air around it seemed to bend and twist, the fabric of reality itself warping as if it were about to tear apart. The storm raged inside the rift, a violent storm that could swallow entire worlds. Oren could feel its power pulling at him, urging him to step forward, to face it. "This is where the storm was born," Oren said quietly. "And this is where it must die." Lyra placed a hand on his shoulder. "You are not alone in this, Oren. The winds, the forces of nature, the realms, they are all with you. You have learned to guide them. Now, it's time to heal the rift, to restore balance once and for all. Oren took a deep breath and stepped forward. The winds howled around him, pulling at his clothes, tugging at his very soul. He could feel the storm inside the rift, a force of raw power that threatened to consume everything. But Oren stood firm. He had faced this storm before. He had faced it within himself, and he had faced it within the world. Now, he would face it here, at the heart of the chaos. He reached out with his hands, feeling the wind swirling around him. The rift pulsed again, its energy surging as if it were alive. But Oren did not fear it. He had learned to live with the storm, to embrace it, and to guide it. And now, he would use that knowledge to heal the rift. With a deep breath, Oren called upon the winds. He could feel them respond, a wave of power washing over him as the winds of Numenez, the winds of the Skikken, the wind shapers, and the cloud-born, all the winds he had come to understand, rushed toward him. They swirled around him, forming a protective shield as he stood at the edge of the rift. The energy of the rift surged, and Oren could feel the storm's power pushing back against him. The rift was not just a tear in the sky, it was a living force, a creature of chaos that had been born from the imbalance of the world. But Oren was no longer afraid. He had learned the lesson of the storm, that it was not to be controlled, but understood. And now, he would use that understanding to heal the rift. Oren closed his eyes, reaching deep within himself. He could feel the storm inside the rift, its power pulsing like a beating heart. He reached out to it, not as an enemy, but as an equal. He called upon the winds, his connection to them growing stronger, and he began to weave them into the very fabric of the rift itself. The storm within the rift howled in fury, but Oren held firm. He did not try to force it to stop. He did not try to control it. Instead, he guided it, like a shepherd guiding a wild beast. He felt the rift respond, its violent energy beginning to calm as he wove the winds into its fabric, soothing its chaos. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The rift pulsed once more, and then, with a sound like thunder, it began to close. The wind swirled around Oren, forming a vortex that pulled the last remnants of chaos into the heart of the rift. The storm, once wild and untamed, was now becoming a part of the balance. Oren's heart raced as he felt the storm's power begin to fade. The rift was healing. The winds were settling. And for the first time, he felt the storm's energy transform from a force of destruction to a force of creation. When the winds finally settled, Oren opened his eyes. The rift was gone. The storm had been tamed. The world, once again, was at peace. Lyra stepped forward, her eyes filled with awe and relief. "You did it, Oren. The rift is healed." Oren stood, his breath steady as he looked around. The world was still. The winds had calmed. The storm was gone. And for the first time, he felt the full weight of what he had accomplished. He had restored balance not just to the world, but to himself. "We did it," Oren said, his voice filled with quiet pride. Lyra smiled. "Together. You've shown the world that the storm can be healed, that balance can be restored. And now, it's time to rebuild." Oren looked out over the horizon, feeling the winds at his back. The storm had been a part of him. It had shaped him, just as it had shaped the world. And now, he was ready to lead the world forward, into a new age of balance and peace. Of course. It's been an incredible journey, and I'm excited to bring this epic saga to its conclusion. Here is the final chapter, Winds of Eternity, bringing everything together with a satisfying and meaningful closure. Let's go. Final chapter, Winds of Eternity. The storm had passed. The rift that once threatened to tear apart the world had been healed, its destructive energy transformed into a force of creation. Oren stood on the highest peak of Numenez, the winds around him now gentle, a reflection of the world that had been restored. The world was no longer the same. It had been scarred, shattered, and remade. And in its rebirth, Oren had found his place, not just as a leader, but as a guardian of the winds of balance, of peace. Below him, Numenez stretched out like a canvas, the spires gleaming under the light of the setting sun. The cities, once fractured and fearful, now stood united, rebuilt by the hands of those who had learned to live with the storm, to understand it. The winds, once feared and wild, now flowed steadily, guiding the people toward a future that had once seemed impossible. But Oren knew that the winds were not something to be controlled. They were a reflection of the world itself, wild, untamed, and yet capable of great beauty and harmony. His role, and the role of those who had stood with him, was to ensure that balance remained. Lyra approached from behind, her footsteps light as she joined him at the edge of the spire. The quiet hum of the winds was the only sound between them. She had been with him from the very beginning, through the storm, the trials, the heartaches, and the victories. She had helped him understand that the winds were not an enemy, but a part of him. They had shared this journey, and now, together, they could look at the world they had helped shape. "You've done it, Oren," she said, her voice filled with quiet admiration. "You healed the world. You healed the storm." Oren turned to face her, his eyes reflecting the depth of everything they had been through. "We did it. Together." Lyra smiled. "And now, the real work begins. Teaching the people, guiding them, so they can live with the winds, not fear them." Oren nodded. "Yes, the winds will always be a part of us. And it's up to us, to all of us, to ensure that they are a force of life, not destruction. We have restored balance, but the future is still uncertain. The storm may have passed, but its echoes will continue to shape the world. It is up to the next generations to carry the lessons we've learned." Together, they looked out over the horizon, where the winds carried whispers of new beginnings. The world was no longer just a place of survival, it was a place of hope, growth, and understanding. But Oren knew that peace was not something that could be taken for granted. It had to be nurtured. The storm had taught him that lesson, and now, as a guardian of the winds, he would pass it on to those who would follow. "We've shown them the way," Oren said softly. "Now, it's their turn to learn. To guide the winds, to work with them." Lyra looked at him, her gaze steady. "And you'll lead them, just as you've led us." Oren's heart swelled with a quiet sense of purpose. He had been through so much, and yet, the journey felt as if it were only just beginning. The winds had changed. And with that change, the world had transformed. Oren had learned to live with the storm, to heal it, and to understand its place in the world. Now, he would teach others to do the same. Years later, the winds of Numanez were gentle, flowing with purpose through the streets, over the mountains, and across the oceans. The cities had flourished, the people united in their understanding of the storm. The world had been healed, and yet, the winds carried a promise of something more, a future built on balance, unity, and growth. Oren, now an elder, stood once more at the edge of the highest spire, watching the world he had helped rebuild. The winds swirled around him, but there was no fear, no chaos. Just a calm, steady rhythm, like the heartbeat of the world itself. Lyra stood beside him, her hair now streaked with silver, but her eyes still sharp, still filled with the fire that had carried them through the darkest times. Together, they had led the people through the storm, and now, they stood as guardians of the winds, watching as the next generation took the reins, ready to continue the work they had begun. Do you ever wonder what lies beyond the winds? Lyra asked, her voice filled with a quiet curiosity. Oren smiled, his eyes twinkling with the wisdom of years past. The winds carry us to places we've never imagined. But I've learned that the most important journey is the one within. Lyra nodded, her expression softening. And the storm never truly leaves us. It's always with us, part of the world, part of the balance. Oren turned to her, a warm smile crossing his face. It's the storm that teaches us who we are. And it's the winds that carry us forward. Together, they watched the horizon, the winds carrying their hopes, their dreams, and the lessons they had learned to every corner of the world. The storm had passed, but the winds would never cease. They would carry the world forward, always in motion, always a reminder of what had been and what was yet to come.